All right, I think it's time to get this show on the road, because if we don't, we're not going to have enough time for your questions, and I'm very loud. Good morning, everyone. My name is Erica Palmer. If we have not had the pleasure of meeting before, I am the founder of Plate and Pitchfork. I've been having farm dinners in Oregon for almost 20 years, as much as I'm loath to admit that it's been that long. And I currently serve as the executive director of the Independent Restaurant Coalition. What that really means is I've had the great privilege of working with all aspects of the food system for the past 20 years and gotten to know farmers and chefs and restaurateurs and seen supply chain issues and seen our need to prioritize farmland so that we have good food to eat. And I'm really excited to be here with you today to talk about how we can grow our food systems for Oregon's economy, health, and climate. And I have an amazing panel, and we'll get to them in just a minute. I could have done this while I had half of you and we were waiting 5 minutes, but I didn't. I wanted all of you in the room. I would love to do a quick show of hands to get to know you a little bit. So if you wouldn't mind, could you raise your hand if you are involved in a tourism organization? Most of you. Anybody in the room a farmer or restaurant owner? Couple, awesome. How many of you are completely new to the idea of a food system? Perfect. That'll make Sydney very happy. How many of you have been actively working with farmers and other food providers in your community and looking to build better partnerships? Okay. Lets us know a little bit about you. Our goal today is that whatever your role in the space is, even if it's something I didn't ask about, that you leave today's session with a little bit of a fresh perspective, maybe some ideas and things that you can apply to build supportive, sustainable, resilient relationships and bolster everyone in your community. We really want you to leave this session not just being inspired, but having something tangible that you can take back and say, oh, I'm going to try that, or I've been doing this all wrong. I'm going to completely flip the board and do something differently because Sydney told me it would be better if I did it that way. So let me introduce you to our panel really quickly. I'm just going to give you first names, and they are going to take a few minutes to introduce themselves and tell you their role in food systems. So we have Marcus, starting closest to me, Sydney, and Jeff. And go ahead and introduce yourself, full name if you'd like, title, where you work, and what you do. Marcus, you get to start.
Good afternoon, everybody. Excuse me, Marcus Hins, the Executive Director of the Oregon Coast Visitors Association. And our region is the entire coast from Astoria to Brookings Harbor. And obviously we've been working on food systems for a few years now, and I can't wait to share, some of the stuff we're doing. Thank you.
I'm Sydney DeLuna, and I work as the coordinator for the Oregon Food Hub Network, and I also work here in Central Oregon for High Desert Food and Farm Alliance as a value chain coordinator.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Fox. I have Sun Life Farm and Ranch in Prineville. We've been there 2 years now is all. I'm originally from Oregon and just moved back here in 2020. My wife and I purchased a farm. Quick funny story to it is that when I moved to Oregon as a young teen, I think I was 11, I went to work for a farmer picking strawberries in the Willamette Valley. And when he would pick us up in the morning from his bus ride, for our bus ride out to there, he would always greet us and say, thank you for coming to my farm today. And he appreciated the help. And he would do the same as he let us off at the end of the day, thank you for helping me out and being a part of my farm. That always stuck with me, so I knew sometime in my life I wanted to farm. And I traversed this country for a long time and finally went full circle in closing that bookend loop. We bought a farm, and that's what we're doing now. We farm lavender, orchard grass hay, and we ranch. For those of you that don't know, honeybees are actually categorized as a livestock. So we say we're bee ranchers, and we have 18 hives throughout a walking apiary. And I appreciate you having me here today.
It's really hard to follow an introduction like that, Jeff. I'm glad we had you go last. In a perfect world, individuals and businesses at all levels of the tourism chain, from farmers to hotels and consumers, would work together. And they'd learn from each other in order to create a more sustainable food system that supports the health of our land, its residents, and respects local culture and supports the economy. When reaching for big goals, because that's a damn big goal, I think it's always helpful to really look at the current condition. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to share your perspective on where we are today when it comes with marrying food systems with tourism. And I don't know if anybody wants to volunteer to go first, but I will suggest that you all have both a local and a statewide view, and you should feel free to share both of them. Sydney, you want to jump in?
I'll start with it. So I work across the state of Oregon. I haven't made it to every single pocket because I haven't currently only been in my role for about 6 months. But I've made it to a lot of different corners of the state. And some areas have a tighter connection between food systems and tourism than others. The coast has a very good connection, which Marcus will speak very clearly to, and it's one that I aspire to see here in Central Oregon. I also work locally in Deschutes, Crook, and Jefferson counties. And, we have a lot of food system players here, and we do have some connection to tourism, but I feel like one of the things that we see at the coast that I'm not seeing here, or I'm not seeing in, say, the Klamath Basin or other places that I've been, is an understanding that tourism can engage at more than the food trail or the PR and marketing level, and can really has an opportunity to engage in the logistics and linkages level. And that to me that's the dream that I would love to see here, and I would love to see in all of the other regions that I have the opportunity to work in, is to see all of you engage at the holy cow, the trucks level, not just the shiny pamphlet level. And I think that sort of cues you up.
Tell us about logistics and linkages, Marcus.
Put me on the spot, huh? So, I happen to agree with that. I think for a long time, our industry has really been stuck on looking at the direct spend, but not really paying attention to economics beyond that. And I think it's time for us to dig a little deeper into, what's happening. And I'd mentioned in the keynote that on the coast in 2018, visitors spent $800 million on food. And to put that into perspective, say residents in Tillamook and Clatsop spend about 97 million. Visitors spent 327 million. Okay, so any economic development agency that doesn't say like our industry is relevant is hogwash. And I think we should really concern ourselves what happens to the money after it's been spent. And I think for economics, I believe the next stage for tourism is to look at how much money we're losing after we spent it, after visitors come in and spend. So we spend all this money, millions, tens of millions on research, consumer profiling, tens of millions on marketing, and they travel here and they spend their money, and then as soon as they spend the money, it leaves. So do we really do all that work for marketing just so the money leaves our state? And so the local perspective is, I looked at the numbers pretty carefully, and I feel like probably the coast loses 200 to 300 million a year in economic leakage because the food we're selling is not from the coast. And so the statewide perspective is, I wonder what the statewide economic leakage is. It's got to be mind-boggling. So.
Can we just take a quick minute? I'm just going to do a room check. Are we all clear on what we're talking about when we're talking about linkages and logistics, or should we spend a minute talking more about that? You feel good about that? Nods? Okay, great. Jeff.
Okay. Well, I think from a farmer's perspective anyway, it's important that we as the public have recognized the gap globally, first and foremost, in the supply chain of food sources, food products. If anything, we've witnessed that heavily during this pandemic period of 2 years. A lot of fractures in that system. It's very fragile. Prior to going into farming, I was in logistics on a global level, and seeing what can happen and affect things all the way down, and the trickle-down effect is going to have some big impact, I think, on the locals here. And as we see this region here, Central Oregon, the growth spurt here is just phenomenal. What we also have to recognize is that from an agricultural standpoint, that we need to really start focusing on growing that sustainability for our region, because during a fracture of any sort, we're going to be dependent upon what's here locally. And the only way we're going to get there, I think, is to have more of this type of programs that are coming into play through these food trails, et cetera, that allow you to visit the agricultural industry while bridging that through the education of what it takes to be there, and then reaching out and endorsing that or getting endorsements from working with your food suppliers, stores, restaurants, et cetera. So when we do bring in the tourism that visits the area, we have a full program that they can see from start to finish. It's not about going just to see the farm. It's about making your way back and seeing how that farm affects the local community, where you're eating, if they can report that, hey, this meat came from this livestock provider over here. It did not come from Iowa. It did not come, it's grass-fed, it's grass-finished, it's not antibiotic, it's antibiotic-free. All of those things make a difference, I think, and that's what carries forward. If you socialize everything on the local level, I think the overall piece is that helps grow tourism, because then the great word is out there about what has this area done, be it here in this high desert area or statewide. Look what Oregon's done. They've recognized something and made it better.
So what you're saying, I think, what all three of you have said in different ways, is not only do we need to make that connections, but by making those connections, we're telling a story. So every meal that is on your plate, every purchase that you're making when you're visiting, whether you're visiting from 50 miles away or 5,000 miles away, there's a story that you're taking home with you. Maybe you've already consumed the story and you remember it and you tell the story as a delicious meal, or maybe you're taking an Oregon product home with you. So to get there, we like to talk about this as a visitor experience, right? Like we talk about, when I talk about agritourism all the time, which has been boring Hillary and the Travel Oregon team forever. We always talk about having farms open to the public. But what we're saying here today is that it's really about more than that. Like, we can open farms, and sure, that's a great reason to travel. How many of you have traveled to visit a farm? How many of you have traveled to visit a restaurant or some place to eat that you heard lots of things about? Okay, so we know we can do that. What we really want to do is make sure that we're following that through in every touch you have in a community, whether it's the hotel, the restaurant, the market, the grocery, that we're buying products from local producers, right? And that we're communicating the story. So, sometimes you walk into a grocery store and you just see apples, $2.39 a pound. And then you see another apple that says it's $3.29 a pound. And you have no idea why that Honeycrisp apple is more expensive than that Pink Lady. And what if your store said, well, this Honeycrisp was grown 5 miles from the store? Like, maybe you'd pay extra for it. We know that the impact of these purchases makes a difference in our economy, but also valuing the way we value that apple. Like, there should not be, I'm on a soapbox now, there should not ever be a 99-cent hamburger, people. Never, ever. That 99-cent burger, that 5 for $5 at Arby's, does not value any of the inputs that went into it. It doesn't value the person that raised the crop. It doesn't value the people that are cooking the crop, right? So when we switch this and we invest in our local supply chain, we can see that rebound everywhere. As Marcus said, we're seeing a lot of leakage because we're not using our own products. It's also really important to think about, if we're saying our farms and our restaurants are why we want people to come visit us, that fundamentally we're taking care of them. We're watching our state dry up. So as much as we really want to have a beautiful golf course, if the water is being diverted to a beautiful golf course, who in your food supply chain is missing out? And what are you producing there? So I'm going to step off the soapbox here, and we're going to try to thread a needle with a rope. What do you all see as the most critical changes that we could take today to move to a place where tourism is supporting our food systems responsibly? Or another way to ask that question, you could tackle this way too, is who have you seen doing really good work, and what advancements are they doing that we should all go home and try to replicate?
sorry. I think that ways that tourism can engage with food and farms and ranchers and fisher folk responsibly involve how you can, I think there's opportunity in how you partner with the organizations that are already working in food systems now. In most of the regions here, there is some organization, some farmers collective, some nonprofit, some for-profit that is doing some of this food system work now. And I think seeking out those partnerships and asking them, how can we help you is, step number one is finding the folks who are already doing the work and honoring that work and hearing that work, which sounds super woo-woo and whifty, but it's the truth. That's how you make that engagement and make it happen. And then from there, figuring out how you can bring resources to that engagement. All of you are tourism professionals, and you know a lot of people, and you work with chambers of commerce, and you work with actual tour providers, you work with marketers, you work with a whole bunch of folks that food system folks don't work with. And I think there's a really, really huge opportunity to connect those two sets of activities together that can help build on the work that's already happening on the ground. And when we go back to this idea of water and water usage, you guys have a really loud voice. You have a way to amplify voices that we don't have that we don't have as easy an access to. It's not what we do. We work with the ground and we move food around. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there in engaging a broader voice.
Jeff, do you want to offer the farm perspective before we go to Marcus?
I'm hoping so. I certainly want to echo what Sydney was saying here relative to becoming engaged with different organizations in the area that are dedicated to bringing the resources together for an educational standpoint. And then when you do take something like the tourism piece relative to farm visits, et cetera, I really like this piece as it's come into this area where we are, quite simply because, we didn't have the ideal property for ourselves in terms of size and what's irrigated, but I certainly learned a lot about irrigation and relative to our shortage of water, first and foremost. What folks don't seem to know is that way back when, this water system for the high desert was kind of based on diversified farming. Meaning that there was more in the way of garlic and peppermint, and those were what they call short crops. Those short crops would be finished in their growth cycle around June, and therefore they're harvested, and there's plenty of water to get you all the way through to October. When the disease kind of took out a lot of that growth piece, and we're limited on the types of crops we could have here, most farmers moved over into orchard grass hay, or timothy hay, or alfalfa, which eat up an exorbitant amount of water for the whole season. So those pieces really kind of come into play, but the understanding the educational component of how important those pieces are to the full cycle of creating the foods that we get on our table is instrumental. So not to toot the horn, but like on our farm here as an example, we have recognized that the success in farming is not how much money you make, it's really how well you can manage your losses. And that's a good way to start out in this business. But we looked at it and said, okay, how do we augment things to where we're fulfilling what we went into farming for, which is really to provide education opportunities for the public first and foremost, but for we look at kids first as a real key there. So I cut in 20 miles of hiking trails and put in the walking apiary. So you're not coming just to see water sprinklers going off in our fields. We catered our events to bring in subject matter experts from OSU, different organizations. We have a new person that just joined HDFFA, who was the curator down at the museum down the road here, and she says, wow, this is a great event. We're doing something called Grassic Park Day. And we Grassic Park, it's kind of fun, where we have 4-H students, FFA students that will all bring different animals out that are dependent upon grasses, native and grown, domesticated grasses, for the survival, and then they get their chance to teach too. But if folks start to understand things like what's all involved with the grasses and where the end piece is to that, or we have another day called Dirt Day. It's called a Soilibration Day, where you learn about dirt, and we're hoping that we can educate those that when we have to become more dependent upon even our own source for produce. You might have your new backyard garden put in. It could just be a box. But for the most part, you have an opportunity to come learn about the different soils in this area and what you have to do to be a successful farmer. I think the more we all start to understand that as a clear picture, and if it comes by way of tourism to make that happen, we're all for it on our side.
That's great. Yeah, do you want to be on our marketing committee? That's good stuff. My goodness. So our industry has everything to help food systems. We really do. We have all these different kinds of contacts and connections, and the skill sets in our industry are incredible. Our industry is very good at telling a story. Like, that's what we do. We're great at telling a story. And together, all of us can harness, I said this in the keynote, we can harness hundreds of millions of dollars of consumer spending and point it in the right direction. We don't market to the East Coast and say, hey, come have some Atlantic cod. Fly over here to eat the fish in your ocean, right? What we do is we just cover it up and we don't talk about it, right? We just don't say that. So then we're being disingenuous. That's my perspective. It's superficial, and I don't like that. So we can harness this purchasing power, and think of what Travel Oregon's doing right now with the Y Guides program. That's an amazing program, lifting up these small guide services, like giving them these expertise in marketing and other things. So when COVID hit, and it doesn't have to be, depends on how you look at it, doesn't have to be a handout. When COVID hit, we bought some online shopping cart software for 2 food hubs, so that they could sell things virtually off their site for people who couldn't walk in their storefront. Well, we know that visitors, go there. And so we're not just making it easier for, someone visiting to buy, but also now we're getting all this free marketing content. Because what do they have to do? They have to take pictures of their products. They have to write descriptions. They have to which farmer is this? Then they put it up. And now there's a live link that we can embed into our marketing stuff and help them sell. There's just endless opportunities for us to provide assistance that really makes sense for us too. If for no other reason, look what happened to the restaurants when COVID hit. The supply chains were too long, and it just destroyed many restaurants. So, we have an opportunity to fix that. We have an opportunity to make our own industry more resilient, and I think it's completely our lane to do that.
Marcus, why don't you keep that mic for just a second? You've clearly made a lot of progress on the coast. You just shared something that you've done. What, beyond just saying, we're going to go do this, we're going to buy this shopping cart software, and we're going to give this to these food hubs, what has helped your region or a specific project thrive? What advice would you give these folks if they're saying, oh, that's a great idea, I want to go do that? What's the foundational, where do you start?
You just listen. It's really not very difficult. You just find out who's in your neighborhood and you see what they're doing, and you just show up genuinely curious and say, well, how do you work? How does your organization work? What are you doing? What are your challenges? And from that very, very simple process, you can find ways oh, wow, we could do that for them. We know how to do that. And it's something we do, it's something we're built to do, and we can just take that, burden off of the shoulder of someone. What we just say is, we want to keep the fisher on the boat, we want to keep the farmer in the field, right? They shouldn't have to be delivering their own products. When they're in a van delivering their stuff, they're not being productive. And we need them to be productive. And so So now on the North Coast, there's this really sexy van called North Coast Grown, and our logo's on it. And so when visitors are there and they see that van go by and they see our branding on it, they're like, wow, that's cool. So that's just a very simple process. Like, just get to know them, knock on the door, show up, ask questions.
Sydney,
And learn.
you were reaching for the mic before that question. Just let you dive in on everything.
Yeah, I was wanting to build a little bit on what Marcus was saying about, in 2020, as we all know, everything changed. And restaurants were very devastated and farmers were very devastated. Some of them who were smaller suddenly were inundated with orders, and some of them who were larger were suddenly like, holy cow, where's my crop going? My restaurant shut down. I don't know where this is going. And the upside of all of that, we sort of all have been through our own individual roller coasters, industry and individually, but the upside of all of that is we are now in a moment where we can reimagine everything about how we engage with partners and how we can support partners. So, what Marco was just talking about of, being part of purchasing a van, getting content from these partners that they now have in the food system, like that's the kind of thinking change that I think could be really incredible for all of us. And it helps us build really interesting, unique, regional identities. And it helps us build opportunity where tourism, I'm sure you've heard this from some folks who hate tourism, and some of you are in high tourism areas, where tourism can feel really extractive to locals. And I think this is an opportunity for us to change that narrative and change that reality where tourism is additive to locals. We're keeping, I think it's like 68 cents. I should know this stat, but I don't. I think it's 68 cents for every dollar spent on local food actually stays in the economy that it came from. So if you come here and you buy food that is produced locally, 68 cents of that dollar stays here in this community. If you buy food that is produced externally, the vast majority of that dollar, as Marcus has broken down, is right out of the community. So this is a way for tourism to continue to build local economies and become a more welcomed part of the economy for the locals that live with tourism.
I can give you a little additive stat to that. 95 cents of every dollar spent at a chain restaurant, 95 cents of every dollar spent at an independent restaurant goes right back into supporting the community. If you take that to a chain restaurant, it drops to 60 cents. So the big chains that are buying their food centrally are really only putting money back into the economy in their labor force, not in their food. And when you turn that to buying local, you amplify. Jeff, did you have something you wanted to add? You had that look. You're poised. I can't tell if it's like
a moment where I was thinking. Huh?
we were, I'm the original question, but we can take this conversation anywhere you guys want to go, was if somebody is just starting out, and I'd love it if you offered this answer as a perspective of as a farmer.
Sure.
If they're, I know we had a couple of farming hands or restaurant hands raised in the room. As a farmer, if you're just starting to think about engaging with tourism, what advice do you have? What horrible things happened in your first year that you don't want anybody else to repeat?
You learn that when you come to tour. I probably share a few of those with you. And I certainly agree with what both of you were saying here too, relative to that. But starting out, yeah, I think the programs that are available in the local communities I think are tremendous, first and foremost. Like here in our area with the HDFFA, we have gleaning teams, if you would. So anytime the farmers have some surplus produce and such, that they take these teams out and we glean that produce, and then essentially the farmer still gets paid for it, mind you. But then that gleaning piece, so you're salvaging a lot of things that might have gone to waste, and those are being taken over to a food bank where it's distributed out to the community. That's a great piece to really kind of get your feet wet from a volunteer standpoint of understanding, okay, this is pretty cool. I mean, you can tour around that if you wanted to. I just think that there's great opportunity through through the different programs that are usually in an area of some sort. And so additionally too, and I failed to mention this earlier because you got one of those scrambled brains, that's what happened here as I was listening to what they were saying and my brain took it a new direction, which is cool, but it's my wife hates it. So, but that said, it's I'm kind of a tech geek, and so even at our farm, and I'm trying to encourage other farmers in our area, since we have that ability there. I'm more of the QR code type guy. So when you're on our, I'm selling tabletop QR codes to local businesses just to kind of help support the trail piece. But what's important to me is that on our trail, when you're learning things, and it's not so much that we want to convert children to become farmers, but we want to convert all minds, I do anyway, not so much that it's conversion, but introduce their mind to the fact that as you learn, the more and more you learn, the more and more respect you have for things. And that stays with, especially kids. That's a seed that we can plant now that would be a betterment later down in their life, to understanding that's a water waste there. That could be going out to a farm. Those are the types of things that we don't start now. It's important to, because, droughts aren't getting any better thus far. But the QR codes are something you can point and you'll learn about the native grasses, the pollinators, what the bees are doing, or better yet, how things lead back to our community. So you might pull up a QR code and we hit you with information on an audio that says, from this is derived this, and this farmer uses it who presents this, and she makes pies, and those pies are sold at this place here in the city of Prineville. It could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be just Prineville only. It could be Bend. Wherever the use is, we want to be able to educate as we go. Don't expect them to look it up. Feed it to them. That's what farming's all about, right? Feeding.
Okay, you can all leave now because you just got the most important piece of advice.
Do you want to be on our technology committee?
So you all are, you want to add something, Marcus?
Well, I do want to add something. I was thinking about our agency's budget over the past half a decade. And we have spent a lot of money on outdoor recreation infrastructure. We've bought kayak launches, we've funded money scraping a trail through the forest and building ramps for mountain bikes and signage. We have spent a lot of money on outdoor rec. It's not the top spend for visitors, food is. And, if we can spend that money on outdoor rec infrastructure, then spending money on food infrastructure is also our lane.
Outdoor rec is sexy, and food, everyone is eating and drinking every day. They don't think about it, right? So that's why
Right.
that's a concept for us marketers.
So I just wanted to add that, for perspective.
So we have feed it to them and let's make food sexy again. Bring sexy back. Is that the theme? That's what we're gonna call this session next year, Hillary. So you all are experts in your field, and I'm sure you get the same questions all the time. So here's your opportunity to tell folks the question you're most tired of hearing from. They're hearing the most. I can't talk today, guys. Sorry. I'm so out of practice of doing things in person. I'm used to Zoom where I can hit mute and pretend that I accidentally hit mute. What's the question you are most tired of hearing on this subject? And what would you like to say about it so you never have to answer that question again?
Do I have to pick just one?
No, you can have 5. We're ahead of schedule. Go for it.
I guess it's kind of a universal question. Well, doesn't tourism just produce low-paying, crappy jobs? And, every industry does. Every industry has those. And so, I feel pretty unapologetic about entry-level positions that come in. But nobody talks about, everybody gets stuck on the direct spend. And nobody talks about all of the money that we brought here and what it does. So if I went to a few restaurants at the coast and I asked them to sort their general ledger for all of their vendors, there would be dozens of small farms that would not exist without that restaurant. And those are good paying jobs. Our industry does pay a lot of good paying jobs. And this isn't quite food related, but like all the properties being built to the coast, like electricians and plumbers and construction people, are you kidding me? They're building tourism facilities. Where do they think this money is coming from? And I think food systems jobs are also very good. Like if the food that's being bought is from here, that means there has to be storage facilities, storage jobs, processing jobs, delivery jobs, and then there's actually product for entrepreneurs to experiment with, to create value-added products. But in our case, if the seafood isn't even there, then how can young entrepreneurs come and create value-added products from our most valuable natural resource? So there's just so many ways we get shortchanged when we're telling people to buy food that's not produced here.
Mine isn't so much a question that I get, but it's sort of an overarching understanding of how things happen. I would love it if no one ever asked me why I can't get this burger or, this pastry made with wheat grown here. Because I would like for people to be able to see how many different steps along the way it takes to get food out of the field and into a restaurant or into a grocery or onto a buffet line. Like, talk about not sexy. Nobody cares about trucks. Nobody cares about cold storage. And yet those are like the really physical, very important things that it takes for food to happen. And they don't necessarily, at a certain scale, produce a lot of revenue or a lot of profit. So it can take a long time to build a food system to a place where there is an entity that can actually take a profit moving local food around. And here in Bend, not here in Bend, we're just reaching that point where some of our food system structures are starting to tip over into a place of profitability. Just to give you a sense of perspective on how big a place needs to be, how much income, how much revenue needs to be moving around the system to get to a place where all of these local food system structures can stand on their own. Bend is just reaching that tipping point right now. And I think that's the part that I really wish people understood, that say in Klamath Falls, it's going to take a lot of public external support to hold that food system up until it reaches a place of true viability. It's on you.
I'll probably go a little off topic here, but I take every question, even though I hate certain ones that are repetitive, that just tells me that that's usually what's on someone's mind. And the more that questions asked, the more I know that it's front and center. So I don't mind answering some of them, even though you really don't want to after a while. But the most common question I usually get is folks that when I try to really socialize the food trail over the last 6 months, a lot of folks that I talk to, you really want tourists coming to your property, and the property's out in your area, and and it's the two-part question here, and then I get others that say, you should be retiring and you chose to open a farm instead. But I've always thought that age should never be a deterrent for getting something done. So it pushed me to hop in even more so. But in terms of all of that, I kind of wind it all together. And as a farmer, I go back to hopping on that berry bus as a kid, and I'm looking forward to being able to say, "Welcome to my farm."
Okay, well, you got the instructions. Those are the questions you shouldn't ask. But now it's time for you to ask questions. And I'm going to do my best talk show host impersonation. And if you raise your hand, I'll bring you a microphone, and we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions of the panelists. I saw a hand. Hold on. We're going to make you talk right into the mic. Those are my instructions here.
Thanks for a really nice presentation, really well informed as well. So I've heard a statistic that something like 40% of food produced is wasted, is lost in the production train. So even if that's half wrong, what might you say about how to educate around food waste in supply chains, in local economy, and so on, if that makes sense?
That sounds like my question.
That is 100% your question.
You are right, a lot of food gets wasted. And there are a number of things that have happened in the last decade plus to capitalize on that. You know, the whole ugly fruit movement, probably a lot of you have heard that. That's one piece of it. Some of it is around buyers being willing, yes, to buy food that is imperfect. Some of it's field waste. So that's where, you know, these gleaning programs come in. Some of it is waste in a production facility. I used to manage some pretty large restaurants, and one of the things I used to say is no square fruit, because it's very easy to cut square fruit really perfectly, and so people square it off and you throw away a lot of fruit. So there's a lot of waste there. But actually the biggest place of waste is in a consumer's refrigerator. A lot of the waste that happens in the food system comes from people over purchasing in their own homes. Restaurants, you know, other food production facilities are pretty well incentivized to not waste food. So once it gets into this world, there's not a ton of waste happening there because people like me are like, holy cow, that's my food margin out the door right now. We can't have that. So that is fairly well controlled, but a lot of waste actually happens in the consumer's refrigerator.
Additional questions?
Can I speak to that really quickly?
Sure, while I march over here, you absolutely can.
You know, I think our industry probably wastes tons of food on all the catered events we do. You know, and I think we just have to think a little harder about how we operate our catering operations and events. Because, you know, there's that human social thing. It's like, oh my gosh, is there not going to be enough food? And you get all anxious and that. And then when is that ever really the case? And so is it okay for people to get like enough to eat but not have to be stuffed, right? And like, or could we package it and send it home with people? Like, we just have to think harder about that food waste. And for seafood, there's horrible waste because they catch the fish and they just fillet it, and we keep about 30% of the fish and we throw the rest away. It's horrifying. So we're looking at models from other parts of the planet, you know, like in Iceland. They have a concept of 100% fish. They literally use 100% of all of the fish. And if they can do it, well, we sure as heck can do it. So we're looking at that.
Hi. First of all, thank you guys. This is probably the best small breakout group that I've been to this week. So yeah. And so that said, I also have like a dozen questions, but I'll try to limit it down. I'm from out of state, and so I'm curious, like, what is the centralization of agriculture like in the state? And then if it is significant, like, is that centralization sending the food out of state versus keeping it here? And I don't, maybe like you don't have the information off the top of your head, but a place where we could look at that kind of data?
Yeah, I was going to say, the vast majority of the food that we grow, Oregon is an ag state. I can't remember exactly where ag is on it's in the top 3 of, you know, money makers in the state. And the vast majority of what we grow leaves the state one way or another. When I'm talking about food systems, I'm talking about small community food systems, and I am by far not the person to talk to about large monoculture food systems. I don't know much about them other than, wow, it's a lot of money that leaves this state on barges.
Well, we can talk, well, first of all, I'll follow up and get contact information from you and send you some info from ODA about some of that. But for instance, sorry guys. I got the lecture before and here I am violating it. We'll get you some Oregon Department of Ag information about that as well. But just as an example, like the cherry crop in Oregon is primarily grown by small farms. We have 33,000 small farms in the state. And cherries and hazelnuts are something that we grow in abundance. We grow well, and we Oregonians could not eat all of the cherries or hazelnuts that we produce, and so many of them do leave the state. But if you look at a crop like blueberries, they've also grown too much to consume in the state, but they've done a really good job of marketing blueberries to Oregonians, and blueberries are easy to preserve. They can become flash frozen. They can go into your blueberry pie. So you see a lot of value-added products that have changed the dynamic of a crop that would traditionally leave the state. But it's a push-pull, right? Like we have growers growing great product, and they're growing it based on the climate that's available to them, or they're fishing in the ocean. Their fishermen are not going to be growing strawberries. But there's a push-pull, right? Like we have this abundance crop. It's a revenue source. It supports an industry. It supports an individual farmer. And at some point, the market can't absorb all of that demand, and so it goes elsewhere. And then you have things like that we could change. It kind of goes back to food waste. If we changed some of our regulations, and I promise, Hillary, I will not go down this rabbit hole too far. Some of the food waste that you see in catering, for instance, can't be given to a shelter. If we change some regs, we could keep that food in the system and put it in bellies that need food. Similarly, hazelnuts leave the U.S. to be processed into hazelnut oil, in large part because we don't have production facilities. So again, if we built the infrastructure and the linkages, that system could be a little tighter and more supportive of the regional economy. And you had another question. I know you have 12, but anybody else that has additional questions, raise your hand, and we'll do one more question, and then we'll go to the other Erica.
Yeah, it kind of continues off that same point. So in the state, are we on a trend towards localization? Is that go in waves? Did it change a lot with COVID? Yeah.
Well, we are in seafood. We're going to lean into this for a long time because it's going to take a long time. And for those of you that weren't in the morning general session the other day, we hired another thing tourism can do. Like we do research. And so we've funded some pretty experienced high-level researchers that spent a couple years looking at seafood landings and sales at the coast, and they've definitively determined that 90% of the seafood sold on the Oregon coast is not from Oregon. 90%. So how much gets exported? And unfortunately, some of it that is sold leaves, gets processed, and then brought back. Yeah, like Dungeness crab goes to China, it gets processed and comes back. Labor, environmental globalization, like the weird incentives built into our entire global economy. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but.
Do you guys want to stay for like 2 hours? We can talk about this. Sydney, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll speak to the part about, did COVID change the way we think about local food? Yes and no. Erica's been doing local food and raising awareness around local food for an unmentionable 20 years.
Not that old.
And in some areas, it's cognitively easier to understand, hey, we could probably grow a lot of our own food here. In the Willamette Valley, it's pretty easy to understand that could be possible. It can be a lot harder to understand here. It can be a lot harder to understand anywhere on the eastern side of the mountains. And so, in some places, this idea of local food and really sourcing locally as a really important thing is much more embedded now, or much more embedded because it's been happening for a long time. And in other areas, it's sort of gathering steam. And yes, COVID really pushed it over the edge. A lot of folks got scared. A lot of regular folks went, holy cow, our food system isn't putting groceries on my shelves, and where are my hazelnuts?
And I can't get flour.
And you can't get flour. All of these things that are really dependent on really, really, really big systems, we saw the fractures in that system. And so there is very much a stronger interest across organizations now in understanding what it would take to feed their population in the event of another big disaster, whether it's a pandemic or a slide on 101 or a fire that shuts down one of the three ways in and out of Central Oregon. There's everything's tied to trucking, everything's tied to where and how things get processed, and we are starting to have a much greater understanding that there's fragility built into that system.
One more thing to add to that. Jeff, did you want to jump in on that one? No.
That's pretty much echoing what we started out with earlier, to the fragility of the system. So long-term planning is going to be a real key to that, identifying if you're not learning from what just happened and planning accordingly, those are long-term pieces, but they can start to be put back into place, and we can right the problems. It's all about problem solving at this point.
So our subject, our slides here says economy, health, and climate. It doesn't say equity, but I'm going to take you to an equity place for a minute. Local food costs more. So when you're talking about pulling food through a supply chain, when you're talking about a moment like COVID, when all of a sudden entire industries were shut down, and you look at what people have to spend on their food, or now when gas prices are through the roof and people are deciding if they're going to fill their tank or they're going to put food on their table, oftentimes those food choices are going to be both the least expensive and oftentimes not nutritious. And so we also need to, as we're cultivating our food systems, keep that in mind. And like I said, there should not be a 99-cent burger, but we also shouldn't price people out of the ability to eat nutritious food. You've got the mic.
Hey. Thank you. What was that? Thank you, all three of you. It's been really interesting learning from you and having this level of conversation at a statewide tourism conference. So my question is, on the Oregon coast, we have these restaurant owners, and they're all in. They're saying, yes, we want to sell local seafood, and one of the biggest challenges is the consumers expect fish and chips on the menu, and they don't understand seasonality. And so the restaurant owners are saying, our biggest challenge is we figured it out. We found the producers, we found the fishermen, but we have consumers coming in and saying, like, well, why isn't this on the menu? Why don't I have this during the total opposite time of the year? And at the same time, like right now in this moment, OSU just came out with this research saying that the #1 reason people are leaving the hospitality workforce is because of customer entitlement. So I'm curious if you've seen case studies, if you have a campaign or an idea of how do we start changing consumer expectations so that our restaurant owners and businesses can actually start having seasonal menus to serve local food.
Sydney, are you and I both going to have you?
Like, I don't know if that's a me or a Marcus. I don't have the studies at my fingertips that say Marcus will on what studies have happened to change this conversation. As a former restaurant manager, many years of having this conversation, especially around seasonality and how you serve a customer. Some of it is in the education too of the chef and the restaurant owner on how to set up that conversation and set up their menus. A lot of times there are substitutions or a different menu item that can fulfill that need. And some of it is around, a lot of it is around having a really strong sense of mission as a restaurant owner and as a chef. Like, I understand that what is important to me is buying locally and contributing to my economy this way. So that means my prices are going to look a certain way and my menu is going to look a certain way, and it's going to look different at different points of the year. And being really clear on that and understanding that that's what that is helps you articulate that message to your customers. You know, we have a farm to fork restaurant here that sources something like 50% of their products are sourced locally, year round, in Central Oregon, where we have a growing season that is about, is it even 8 weeks, really? It's really short.
5 weeks this year,
Yeah.
maybe 5 weeks. It's gonna be tough.
And the way they do that is by having commitment on building the partnerships, commitment on flexibility on how they build and price their menus. You know, it's an education experience for the restaurant owner as much as it is for the customer.
Think about this. Some of you have to time travel to before you were born. 20 years ago, nobody had a kale Caesar on their menu. Now they're everywhere, right? So it comes from starting small and building awareness and also embracing what it is, as Sydney said, like, yeah, there's a part where you market to your consumers, and yes, being in the restaurant industry right now sucks. But anybody that's in hospitality, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel, has chosen a career that is hospitality, and it's of being service to others. And it's not hard for us to stand at a table and say, oh, we don't have cod and fish and chips, but we do have a salmon fish and chip, right? But it takes that willingness, as Sydney said, in the kitchen as well.
Yeah, if our industry can't fix that problem, like no one can. I mean, our ability to tell a story, our ability, like the reach of our industry, like our ability to completely saturate like a whole market with messaging from all different, like we can do that. And I think that's another way that our industry can really help the food systems. And I can't speak very well to terrestrial, food, but groundfish has a huge biomass out there right now, and it is a year-round fish. Groundfish, there's like 18 species of groundfish. About 20 years, our groundfish fishery collapsed due to overfishing. But now, 20 years, now there's like 18 species that are certified as best catch by Seafood Watch, and there's a huge biomass of groundfish out there, and they're not on the menu yet. Like we can do that. We can do that by, like we're going to be developing a seafood butchery training for chefs and sous chefs along the Oregon coast so they can become familiar with them. We've been funding Shop at the Docks for consumers to like, how do you go down to the docks and buy fish off of boats? Like it's a visitor experience. Like that's another thing we can do. And then, so groundfish, seafood butchery. So that, like, again, there's all these avenues and solutions that we have at our disposal to make this better. But I also think visitors are really open. I think they're open to hearing about seasonality. I think they're open to like, oh, I can't get this now, but here, because that's what this place is. And we shouldn't be shy about that or apologetic about it at all.
I'll talk to my boss about it.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for all of your contributions and what you're doing and here today. I wanted to ask if soilbration is trademarked or if I can use that. Just a nod would be either. Okay. Yes, it's trademarked or no?
Yes, it is.
Okay, yeah, dang. And then I wanted to thank Erica for that posing the question in that way, because sometimes I think these problems feel really, really big, and obviously the answers are it's a long run, right? This isn't going to be fixed tomorrow. Marcus has talked to that. But we have to start somewhere, and I think framing the questions in those ways really, for me, helps kind of ignite my marketing brain on how can I package toolkits that can help our local restaurants. And that's something for me, it's like wham, bam, no problem. Like, I got it. But I don't necessarily know anything about infrastructures and processings and that kind of thing. So not a question, just a statement, so thank you. And then the one other thing I was just thinking as I'm listening is my background's in the wine industry and in grape farming, which is often forgot about in the farming world in a weird way. Everyone finds wine very sexy, but not farming. But winemaking is farming. So I think that there is something there. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but I think that there's a page that we can take from the viticulturists and the enologists and apply it to our other crop farmers and figure out a way to make farming sexy. The other thing that I think about is the food trail and how that's a really big start. But a lot of these farms aren't prepared for visitors at all. It's almost uncomfortable when you go. They're uncomfortable, you're uncomfortable. There's like a little tiny sign that says farm trail or food trail, and that's it. And it's like, what do I do here? And they don't know either. So I think creating the asset's great, but we have to also kind of help them, help us, and continue that process and help with toolkits, signage, information. Like Marcus said, we have that capability. We're marketers. We can do that. They aren't. And so I think following through a lot on this is important. And I think the other piece to that is collaboration. And that's where the wineries in Oregon have really been able to excel, because they realized early on that they had to collaborate to become a destination. One vineyard is not going to draw people. But if they make a trail, all of a sudden people come. But they had to do that together. So with the food trail, we've made the trail. Are the farmers collaborating though? Are they talking? Are we facilitating that? Those are the questions that are running through my mind and that I'm going to take back to my team.
So we are over time, but we started late, obviously. I want to thank my incredible panelists, especially Jeff, who jumped in last minute. So Jeff, Sydney, and Marcus, thank you all very much. And I want to thank all of you for joining and being such a great audience. And here's the thing. Go back and do something. It's okay to fail fast. Just go do something, and you'll find your way. Have a great day.